Thank you for joining us, everyone, today. My name is Tim Bandos. I am the Executive Vice President of Cybersecurity Services here at Exidium. Exidium offers an endpoint protection platform that offers a wide range of cybersecurity services, including MDR, XDR, all the different DRs you can imagine, except for disaster recovery, of course. But today is our 8th episode of the CISO Blend webinar series, which is actually pretty exciting for me. It is titled a Zero Trust Roundtable. Now, of course, I completely trust the brilliant minds at this roundtable today, but we're going to discuss zero trust as it relates to cybersecurity. Like, what does it actually mean to implement zero trust framework? What are the cost implications? What are the risks? You know, we have an esteemed list of colleagues here that are going to be able to answer those questions. So before we do that, I would like to introduce every one of them. I'm going to start with Dr. Erdal. He is named actually among the top 50 technology leaders by CIO Online and IDC. He's a chief cybersecurity strategist and CISO for Exidium as well. He's also a professor at Charles Sturt University, and his expertise spans end-to-end IT solutions, management, communications, innovation. He's a well-known public speaker and an award-winning technical expert, author, and creator of certifications from prestigious organizations such as Microsoft, EC Council, CertNexus, and other expert vendor levels. Did you write this, Erdal? This sounds like, I mean, you're really bragging about yourself. I mean, there's a lot here.
That was really not me, but thank you.
Well, Erdal, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to have you on our CISO Blend webinar series today. We also have Raymond. He is an independent IT architect and trainer from the Netherlands, believe it or not. He has been an active in the IT industry for more than 30 years, for which 20 years were focused on Microsoft infrastructure products for both government and financial institutes. Raymond is also an author of multiple books on Windows and security. And as an architect, he supports organizations in IT strategy and realization of their next-gen workplace infrastructures. Raymond is also actively involved with the national and international IT communities and has been a speaker at multiple international Microsoft events as well. Raymond, welcome. I'm glad to have you be on the call. And finally, but not least, we've got Chaim Sanders. He leads corporate security, cloud security, detection engineering, and incident response at Lyft. Not Uber, but Lyft. He's got practical experience building and leading security teams with skills in software security, security testing, and development across several different industries, including healthcare, financial, entertainment, and technology. He also co-leads an active committer of the OWASP core rule set project. I love that. That's been around forever too. So thank you for your contributions there. All right, welcome, Chaim. Thank you for joining our call today. So we're going to start off with a round of questions, right? I'm going to hand it off to you guys. I'm going to start off with a softball question. Erdal, you're going to be the first one, okay? Because, you know, why not? The first
Shouldn't we start with our guests first?
Oh, man, listen, I want to start with you as a softball. Right? I'm going to go with listen, these guys are super intelligent, right? I'm going to give them the hard balls. We're going to start off light for you, okay, Erdal?
I love you, Timmy.
By definition, how do you define what zero trust? What does zero trust mean to you?
All right, let's do a live demonstration. Timmy, we work for the last few weeks together now. Can you borrow me $10, please?
I'm sorry, you want to borrow $10 from me?
Yeah.
Sure, why not? I do not trust you. I need to authenticate you first.
See, I mean, thank you very much. With the first $10, you started already to authenticate me, and that's exactly what zero trust is. You know, doesn't matter who I am, what I do, it's always about to verify, then trust. This applies to everything that we have in computing today. I mean, look, we work in the same company, but I'm in New Jersey. You're in the other side of the coast, if I'm not wrong, right?
Tampa. Yep.
Yep. Raymond is in Netherlands, so how are we going to trust each other? Everything's about digital identity. Everything's about connecting remotely or connecting through devices. And the best way to ensure that you claim who you are is to verify it. And that's, for me, zero trust.
That makes sense. And would you say like multi-factor authentication is a part of that strategy? I mean, like, what is the best method, you think? Yeah.
Of course, passwordless authentication is the best. I mean, these days, unfortunately, it doesn't matter how smart you are, we can be part of a phishing attack. Or if we are reusing our passwords in multiple sites, and as unfortunately breaches happen, we might lose our password. And the easiest way to secure a password would be, of course, as I said, MFA or passwordless authentication, which is, in my opinion, the core.
The core, that makes sense. So speaking of core, there are, I would say, a set of principles associated with zero trust. And I'm going to toss this one over to you, Raymond. Like, what are some of the core principles associated with implementing a zero trust architecture?
Well, you already mentioned authentication, identity. That's, I think, one of the first and probably one of the most important parts of setting up your zero trust strategy, because yeah, you have to know who those people are. Then you have to ensure that you implement at least security. So ensure that nobody can do more than he or she is supposed to do in your network, or access more than he's supposed to access in your network. Then of course there's monitoring. Keep an eye on what's going on, know what's normal, what's not normal, and ensure that you identify anomalies and act on that. Then there is segmentation. There are probably some older parts of your infrastructure that you cannot actively use zero trust for, so you cannot check everything up front. And then you might have to implement some extra controls, and segmentation can help with that. And last but not least, there is data encryption. Ensure that all data that you transport and that you carry with you is encrypted always, all the time, so that nobody can get to it when they're not supposed to get to your data.
That sounds like the primary four core principles. I 100% agree with you on that. You bring up a great point, though, on the segmentation component, right? Because there are legacy applications, legacy platforms that might not be able to adhere to zero trust principles, just given how old they are. I guess this question is over to you, Chaim. Like, how do you work around those legacy systems, right, in order to adapt zero trust? Is there a way of kind of bringing them into the fold, or do you segment them off? Like, what would be your approach to legacy devices?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tim. Thanks for asking. The real focus here, or I guess the concern, is how do we do this in a secure way, right? We can always keep legacy capabilities around, and that's never going to functionally be a thing that we can't do, but we'd like to introduce this zero trust environment so that we can unify our capabilities to look at logs and do authentication and authorization and monitoring, as Raymond just indicated. To help with this problem, there are a number of tools that are available, or approaches that are available, to augment your zero trust environment to make it, let's say, backwards compatible. Some of these involve tunneling type systems, which we can see build a virtual network between the user and the application that can't be authenticated. There's also additionally things like reverse proxies that can sit in front of these legacy tools and speak the language of the legacy tool, but also speak the more modern authentication principles in play. And of course, if all else fails, you can, for instance, put zero trust assumptions around legacy principles, but reduce the scope of them. So things like VPN, although is a bad word in modern authentication today, can still be used in some respects to augment your zero trust methodology and rollout, and enforce authentication at the VPN level and just reduce the scope of it to reduce its risk that it poses to the organization.
I love that. No, that's a fantastic answer. And for our listeners on today's call, just, I sent these questions to these guys maybe 5 minutes before, so none of this is prepped. That was a perfect answer. You guys are right on point. This is why we invited you guys. You guys are the professionals. I love that, Chaim. Thank you so much. I guess back to you, Erdal. Are there any strategic considerations that kind of need to be taken up front first, right, before you implement a zero trust architecture? Like, what do you need to think about before you implement or go down that path of zero trust? What would you do, Erdal?
I mean, the terminology, the concept, the benefits are great, but unless you are a brand new organization and you're setting up zero trust from scratch, it is not as easy as it sounds. Strategically, you have to think on how you're going to implement all these. I mean, it's easy. I mean, today, the easiest way to implement zero trust is using cloud services. If you go to Microsoft, Google, Amazon, they all provide you those services to make your life easier. Or if they come to us, to Exidium, we have already zero trust embedded to our products, to our services. But think about a bank, which is 50 years plus old. How easy is it to implement zero trust? I bet, I mean, as an ex-CISO of a global bank, I know that for sure, they have some legacy application. they have some cloud restrictions, like registration, governance, right? GRC. Or I can go and count multiple issues. The easiest way for me to implement zero trust is, Raymond mentioned it, segmentation. So how are we going to segment? The easiest way to do that is to separate your most important data from less important data. As we have to move to data-centric approach, making, for example, a bank zero trust in one day is not possible. But what is possible is to create a strategy where you can go step by step. For example, get your most important data there, put the segmentation, use the benefits of the cloud or the service provider, and then go ahead. You mentioned MFA, perfect, or passwordless authentication. Yeah, I still know some authorities, some organizations, they use Windows XP. Yes, I'm not joking, still Windows XP. And they have some applications that unfortunately cannot be migrated to newer version of Windows or newer version of Linux, whatever. So what are we going to do with those guys? Simple. So if you have risk, if you have application which is with high risk, start with those. So back to your question, building the strategy is probably the first step that you need to take. I mean, many people talk about the benefits, many organizations want you to move in, but we have to always look in the reality. And the reality sometimes is different than, I mean, I want to drive like Michael Schumacher, but I'm driving as myself. So to be like him, I have to train like him. I have to practice like him. I have to take classes like him. But it doesn't mean I cannot be a good driver. So I can utilize services from organizations to move ahead. And my job, for example, as CISO, will be first to know what I have and where I want to be. The rest is easy.
Right, that makes sense. So Raymond, I mean, you know, Erdal brings up a lot of great points there. Would you consider doing like a zero trust maturity assessment, or like what would that process look like before you even do it? Is there a baseline that you need to go through to see what you need to have in the first place? Like maybe talk a little bit about that process.
Well, of course, yeah, you need to have a baseline. You have to know, first of all, you have to assess what you have. That means assess what you have in infrastructure, assess what you have in data, and categorize what is less or more vulnerable in your environment to be attacked by the bad guys. And then start with those high-level assets to protect them. So yeah, that's kind of a way to start the process and move into your project and yeah, make steps towards, make small steps, make baby steps. Don't try to do it all in one time.
Right, and that makes sense. And you know, Ray, you mentioned a lot of, you know, core principles associated with zero trust, like continuous monitoring, segmentation, encryption. All of this obviously comes at a cost, right? Yeah. So Chaim, to you, Chaim, I mean, what are those costs and administration and ongoing maintenance? I mean, is that something that also obviously needs to be considered up front? And how do you even project or calculate something like that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And the principle here is that there are costs, and you mentioned them. A lot of them come from increased amount of security events being processed and needing to be reviewed in certain situations. Now, we'll certainly talk about probably the 300-pound gorilla in the room, I think, in more detail when we start talking about how can artificial intelligence or other types of
it's coming.
Aid in this. And I think you'll see over the next 3 to 5 years that a lot of organizations really look to that to help them. But at the current time, you're increasing the amount of log volume particularly. And so using a tool that's aware of the situation and aware of the tooling that you're leveraging is going to allow you to help mitigate the amount of logs that a team needs to recognize. The flip side of this, though, is this is all visibility that you really wanted anyway to begin with. And so not having it is really a risk. And as Erdal so properly pointed out, ZTA is all about risk mitigation. How do I continue my story of mitigating risks for my high risk applications, as Raymond pointed out, and also my heavily used applications so that my organization has less exposure.
Yeah, and that makes sense. So I guess taking it a step further, you think about, once you've start to implement a zero trust architecture and once it's in place, like what are the implications or potential impacts of doing that, right? Are there impacts to the end user, to the business? Like I'd love to understand what are the kind of the setbacks or cons associated with moving forward on a zero trust architecture. I'm going to we'll start with Erdal. I'd like to hear from all three of you on this one, but go ahead, Erdal.
All right. So it starts again with proper strategy. Once you create a policy, and to create this policy, you have to ask 6 simple questions like who is going to accessing the resources? Remember, this is zero trust. We have maybe remote users. We have users they are traveling. We have users they are in the head offices. Then what applications are going to be used? Are they ready for zero trust application? Are they legacy applications? So you have to look what kinds of applications there are. Then when is another question. When is the resource being accessed? Where is the packet destination? Why is the packet trying to access resources with protect surface? And of course, the question will come to how. Putting all this together is going to help us to create the policy, create the necessary steps to move ahead. And as Chaim and Raymond mentioned, risk mitigation is the most important thing here. What is more expensive? Spending some money with your cloud provider, with your service provider, or you mentioned Uber, like the ex-CISO of Uber being 8 years in jail for not implementing the right necessary steps. So, or what is more expensive? Losing your customer trust, losing your share market value, or implementing some money towards digital transformation with security in mind to move ahead to a more secure future. So you have to ask all those questions, and I think the answer of this question will help you to answer your question.
Yeah, that makes sense. Ray, what do you think?
Well, of course, there will be impact, and the level of impact depends on what organization you're implementing and what kind of implementation you're doing for that organization. But for instance, there will probably be impact for end users, like you will request from your end users to start using MFA, for instance, or start using passwordless authentication as a part of your zero trust implementation. On the other hand, the zero trust implementation may also increase the level of complexity for defending and protecting your environment. You probably will implement some new policies in there, and people have to adapt to that. And that also impacts both your management organization and your end user organization. Another part of this is that if you start all this, you have to tell people why you're doing this, and they have to be aware of the fact that they are working with data and resources that are vulnerable and how to deal with that. So you have to train your people. And that means training from the end user to the IT management. So all levels have to be trained, and they have to be trained on different levels. So the impact there might be bigger than you expect beforehand.
Right.
And
yeah.
Well, okay.
No, that was great. Great. I'm sorry, Ray. I didn't mean to cut you off. So go ahead, keep going.
No problem. Well, and last but not least, well, people are probably working differently after the implementation of Zero Trust. So it will change their way of working. So workflows and processes will change with the implementation of Zero Trust.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you also kind of alluded this too around, people and authenticating, right? I guess as individuals also change roles and responsibilities in their organization, like how do you keep up with that, making sure that they still have access to the data that they need to, in order to even perform their job function. So I'm sure there's a variety of, potential impacts there, and, staying on top of that. Chaim, do you have anything additional to add to that? I mean, I know these guys covered pretty well. I know you're third. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's totally fine. I mean, we definitely heard a lot of interesting conversation about security versus productivity trade-off. Erdal was correct in saying that we're definitely seeing this as an emerging best practice, and emerging best practices mean two things. One, the legal team is going to be very interested in us implementing these because these are the controls that we're going to be asked about in court if there's a breach. The second area of that is compliance. And we've already started to see NIST adoption here. And what follows NIST adoption is usually the rest of the compliance frameworks from around the world, or in some cases, they're ahead of us, or ahead of NIST. And that's also great. So we can expect to see both compliance and legal frameworks dedicated towards zero trust. What this means is obviously we'll see more tooling here. And this is actually a really key environment because we're living in a time where security for the first time is actually making gains against users, user experience, I should say. So we heard Erdal talk about passwordless, and this is definitely one of the areas that we've been, that folks have been very keen on from the security side to give a better experience to users. But this isn't the only part of zero trust that is a very useful aspect or could be a very useful aspect to users. You just mentioned, Tim, a very interesting one, which is changing in roles. And a refined, granular, user-based access control system that Zero Trust prescribes really enables teams to be more flexible in that regard and quickly allow users to change roles. The sort of flip side of this is we already all have most of the tooling available, and as tools get better and cheaper, which they do over time, hopefully, won't name any vendors there, but as they get better and cheaper over time, it's all a big question about how to make them play effectively. So we've talked a lot about authentication, but you're starting to see tools like the one that Erdal was just pointing to integrate into the zero trust story more cleanly when you start talking about posture management. How does my EDR play with my authentication, vice versa? How does my MFA play with my authentication? It's sort of a well-traveled story. And then you combine those all together, and that's really the story that you're talking about for zero trust, in addition to what we've talked about for its core principles and benefits.
Yeah. Yeah, Chaim, you bring up a great point around tooling and different technologies. I mean, you go to, RSA or any of these vendor, sponsored, type things. You see this everywhere now, like zero trust, EDR companies, zero trust, data loss prevention, zero trust. So you got, as a buyer, it can become very confusing, right? So what technology do you start off with? I mean, is it an authentication-based technology to kind of get you there first, or do you focus on all the different technologies you have in your stack and how you can kind of migrate towards that zero trust model? Like data loss prevention is a great example. I came from a data loss prevention company recently, right? And, protecting sensitive information and assets and who has access to that is absolutely critical for a DLP vendor, right? So does DLP start to position themselves as like a zero trust provider? I mean, how do you see that, from a marketing perspective? Is there anything wrong in that? Do all these technologies need to focus on how they, kind of zero in on that zero trust capability? I know here at Exidium even, right, we're an endpoint protection platform. We've got something called zero dwell containment, right, where we containerize unknown threats. And we have this zero trust model where we don't trust any unknown threats. Does that help in our marketing or does that hurt us? Like, I would love to hear kind of your thoughts on, how vendors position themselves. Ray, I'll start with you on this one.
I don't think you should focus too much on technology. It's more of making sure that you have your policies in place that's the first thing to do. And then look, how can we implement it? And I like, we call it the KISS principle in the Netherlands. I'm not sure if this is proper language, but it's like, keep it simple, stupid.
Mm-hmm.
So,
not offend anyone here, Raymond. Jeez.
Okay, cool.
No, I know, I'm kidding.
But yeah, try not to overcomplicate things.
Agreed.
So each and every vendor may have the most comprehensive solution in their area, but is that what you need to implement the proper policies?
Right.
So I think that's the first question.
Zero trust. Don't even trust your vendor. Ensure that your policy applies everything and everything.
Exactly. And I think that's where you have to start. Ensure that you have your policies in place and that you start building your security controls based on those policies and try not to overcomplicate.
Yeah,
And
that's sound advice. I love that. Yeah, Chaim, what do you think?
Yeah,
Would you
I
concur?
definitely
Yep.
agree. A lot of this is certainly that there's a marketing hotness to it, and there's no denying that we keep hearing it, and so we keep saying it. The flip side of marketing hotness, though, is when people keep seeing it, they build towards what they think the industry is looking for. And so in certain respects, people are starting to build their tooling towards a zero trust environment first as their guiding principle, and then using legacy environments as a secondary fallback where they can still support them, but they work best in this conjunction. And you're seeing that with a lot of partnerships between large players where they say, we work best with this authentication layer or this security posture or this XDR or blah, 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 which is interesting. To, I think your original question, you said, like, where do you start, right? That was this. To me, like, one of the guiding principles that we talked about was authentication. And you keep coming back to authentication and authorization, which Raymond very clearly pointed out. And this is one of the kind of interesting areas of zero trust is you really want to have one single source of authentication. And if you don't, you do yourself a major disservice. And for those who are sort of interested in the background, obviously we start talking about things like BeyondCorp from Google, which sort of was the premise behind zero trust about a decade and a half ago. And if you don't have one single source of authentication, it becomes hard to enforce good communication between all your vendor apps, which is what we're talking about, but also basic security posture and policy checking, because you have to do it in multiple places. So if I was going to start anywhere, I'd say that's where we should start. But also there's a whole bunch of risks and other facets to consider in terms of price and increase in scope when you start doing that. So it's really, you got to buy in, and you can partially buy in some ways, and sometimes you'll get benefit and sometimes you won't.
Right, and that makes sense. Erdal, anything else to add to that?
Where do I start?
Oh
Everything,
boy.
you know, it starts from TCP/IP. Oh no, I'm not going that bad.
Start at the top of the stack, layer one.
Start right from layer one. So we have to look at the device risk and user risk. Then we have to make decisions. Then we have to create enforcement. Then we have to look in the control panel, control plane, sorry. Not just in the network layer, as I stated, also in the identity layer. Because yes, you might use legitimate protocols, legitimate security tools, but at the end it comes to your identity. Who are you, Tim? Prove it, right? And that's where I'm gonna start.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great. So one thing I kind of want to pivot to, and Chaim, you mentioned it earlier on, kind of talking about machine learning or artificial intelligence. How do you think that's going to play a role in zero trust, or, you know, kind of the migration to this whole architecture, you know, a year from now, 2 years from now? Like, how do you see that impacting kind of this whole industry?
Who? Okay.
Yeah.
Chaim.
Yeah, okay. That's really, like, I don't like to be alarmist, right? Because we really don't know where this is going. We can say certain things for sure. Threats are going to get faster. That is very clear to everybody here. And it's because the tooling becomes available and more ubiquitous. And that's where we actually see the low quality but high number threat attackers leveraging. This is where we're going to have to defend against. But then there's also the defenders side of this, where defensive tools should get better at doing tasks that we particularly consider mundane, scrubbing through large amounts of data or making connections between applications. I think we'll start seeing a lot of glue layers becoming way quicker. And I for one, am very excited to say, like, hey, something funky happened with this user over here. Do something over here. And we have some tooling that can provide that, but there's so many vendors in the market that it really will allow for quite quick transitions where folks don't have to write everything themselves. It will just write it for them. And that's the hope, right? We reduce the amount of manpower and increase the amount of security, but of course, attackers will also increase their capabilities at the same time.
It's used both ways, right? I mean, both of us, we wrote a course where, what, 5-6 years ago for logical operations. And I remember that discussion that we had. Back then, Cloud was still fairly new, and people were like, what is going to happen with the cloud? Today, cloud is the object that you have to use. There is not too much alternative. In my opinion, sorry, I jumped in, by the way, to be second. In my opinion, AI is going the same way. Is AI, I mean, it's going to be there, but don't forget, hackers are also going to use AI. So it's not just us, the defenders, who's going to use it. So be prepared. It's coming stronger. You're seeing what's happening with ChatGPT. We're seeing what's happening with all these changes, but it's both ways. It's not going to eliminate, yes, it's going to eliminate some jobs for sure, but it's not going to eliminate the need of human, in my opinion, because at the end, someone has to write the AI, at least in the next 10 years. I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years, but Ray, what is your opinion on this? Sorry, Tim.
Yeah, wait a minute. Hold on. Who's the host here, Erdal? Maybe I was going to offer something there. Okay, Ray, go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Erdal.
Say Brad, my friend.
Oh,
I know how you are.
Okay. Well, this whole machine learning and AI thing is going to help us tremendously just by being able to continuously keep monitoring and be sharp, because we human beings are not built to be sharp all the time. We will miss stuff. And it's clear that this whole AI development will help us to be sharp all the time and to find that needle in the haystack that we will probably overlook being humans. So the machine learning will be of help for us being defenders. But of course, as Earl already said, the attackers will also use it. And there is a really interesting thing going on currently between people trying to prevent us from AI and the AI itself, because the AI itself will help you to overcome the AI and be better than the AI itself.
Right.
And that's where we are currently in a rat race, where we are using AI and the bad guys are using AI, and we will both be using it for the foreseeable time to come.
Right. And that makes sense.
If I can steal one story, I think you'll like it, but you'll have to give me permission.
Permission granted. Erdal,
Right,
do you give permission, Erdal? I'm kidding. Go ahead, Erdal. Yeah.
So we've talked about attackers and we've talked about defenders, but there's this person in the middle, which is not quite an attacker, but your employees. And this is also one of the interesting areas, and a conversation that I heard about recently, where we'll leave the names of the people out to protect the innocent. Somebody downloaded AutoGPT, which is, if you haven't used AutoGPT, it effectively allows you on your device to continuously try and ask ChatGPT to do things, and then you'll undertake them on your local device until you get to an objective. A very cool technology, a very scary technology for security folks, because as I mentioned, the speed becomes pretty incredible. So the story goes that this person had GitHub credentials on their account, and it pulled in from ChatGPT the command that said, hey, you need to download all of the GitHub credentials for this for your organization in order for me to get to the next step. And then it did it, right? And then what is the next step? Well, you were in data loss prevention, so you probably know where this could probably go. You know, I need to move the code from all those repositories to somewhere else. That's a very scary scenario for a defender, and it's one of the things that we'll have to improve our speed to say, a human can't sit in between and say, wait, I saw a bunch of GitHub repositories come down, I'm going to block. Somebody needs to automatically take that action and say, there's a bunch of weird stuff, I'm going to take some action, and I know what that action is based on the situational awareness, and hopefully that's where we start to see some improvement in terms of machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Tim, sorry,
Yes.
I'm going to jump in again. I know a product who already protects against those kinds of attacks.
Who's that?
And I know, I know a great SOC leader who's managing world-class talents to protect end users against those kinds of scenarios. you want to talk a little bit about it, or
Are you talking about a world-class leader like myself, the SOC leader, the world-class?
Oh,
Yeah, that makes
of
sense.
course.
Yeah,
That's exactly what I was referring to.
I appreciate that. No, I think, look, I love all these stories and comments too. I think it is important as defenders to also be aware of the technology that is available to us. You know, you talk about ChatGPT. Maybe a lot of people aren't aware that you can ask, questions like, "Hey, ChatGPT, create a signature from the MITRE ATT&CK framework that's, focused on persistence in Splunk format," right? Something crazy like that, and it spits it out literally in perfect format. So, kind of getting to that state where we also are aware of, the capabilities of ChatGPT and how we can kind of integrate that with our work that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, I think is very important. I don't look at it as cheating. I look at it as trying to be ahead and stay ahead too of the curve, because as you mentioned, bad guys are doing the same thing. They're saying code this piece of, malware that does this and that. Of course, they're not using the term malware because they want to, bypass and, circumvent, some of the safeguards that are in place in ChatGPT. But that story that you provided, Chaim, is scary, right? Because now you're getting to that state where, as defenders, we have to be aware of that, right? That's a use case scenario from a data loss prevention perspective where we need to be able to look for that sort of thing. So how do we create rules for those style attacks? And that's going to be, on our agenda, right? That's the next thing kind of looking for. So I love that story. That's a great story. I guess given that, right? One of the things is around continuous monitoring in zero trust environments. How do we do that? Is there an element where, organizations now need to build their own SOC teams? Do they need to look to MDR providers that are focused on, zero trust? Because MDR is very specific on what they look for. A lot of times they'll say maybe they're XDR and they look at endpoint detection response logs and, AV logs, but are they really looking at authentication logs and, zero trust type logs as well? Like maybe that's a part of the requirements. So I guess maybe over to you, Ray, like how do we ensure that we have continuous monitoring? Is that something you outsource, or do you kind of keep it inside? Like what would be your recommendations around that?
Well, if you outsource or keep it inside depends on the organization. It depends.
It does.
I think that's always the question. Are you big enough to set up your own SOC, and do you have all the knowledge in place in your organization to actually do the processes that are required to properly do it? And if you don't, then it's probably time to outsource it. And if you do, well, then there is a project to start, because you have to implement a whole lot of stuff. You have to start implementing your SIEM, your security information and event management system. You have to start implementing real-time monitoring and the tools that are involved with that. And you have to make sure that you have all the processes in place. You have to make sure that you train your employees how to deal with all those situations that may occur, that you have the books with you with all the plans to act when the shit hits the fan. And yeah. And then of course, you have to regularly check if you're still up to date. Make sure that you regularly organize your assessments. And ensure that you are still, modern, doing it the way it should be done at a certain point in time, because things change over time. If you implement it today, tomorrow there are different requirements.
Right.
And you have to keep up with that.
Yeah. And Chaim, anything else to add to that? When poop hits the fan, as Raymond said? I'm not gonna say the bad word.
There's no good answer here. And a lot of it is a consideration of money, as is always the case.
Yeah.
So if you're a 200-person startup, can you afford to bring in a SOC? Probably not, is your right answer, depending on what you do. If you're a 20,000-person company, but you make dog bones, does it make sense to have a security operations center? I think everybody on the call would say yes, but like, how do you sell that to your board?
Right.
That's a different conversation for a different meeting that hopefully we'll have, that's not necessarily zero trust related. But it's going to be a hard sell, right? Like, what does the board of a dog bone company know about threats in the cybersecurity space? And does it extend that far outside of ransomware, which is something that zero trust can definitely help with? But I'll leave it at that.
Right. Yeah, the dog, definitely minimal knowledge probably in cybersecurity for sure. Erdal, anything else to add to that last question?
Do you mind if I do some marketing? Like, do we have to really
Go ahead.
give a leg and arm to have a SOC? I know some great SOC providers, MDR, EDR providers, they don't ask for leg and arm, and they give you people like Tim and to protect them. Again, of course, I'm talking about ourselves, even though I'm not in marketing, but that's what we do already. But back to your question, I think what is important here is to define the protection surface. If you know what we want to protect, then you can make your decision easier. Yes, look, I'm a bank, a small bank like SVC who went bankrupt, right? But I don't have money to implement in security. So is it worth for me to have a SOC or not? You have to look then your attack vendors. Bank equals FCI, financial institutions equals usually most attack vectors. So if yes, as a CISO, for example, I have to define what am I going to protect? Money. Okay, what is money? Data. Then money is data. I mean, we have to look if it's a credit card information piece, then maybe we're going to implement PCI. If it's health organization, maybe we're going to do PII, whatever, HIPAA, whatever. Then we have to look at the applications. Is it a custom software inbuilt? So, or is it off the shelf software? Then we have to look at the assets. Then we have to look at the services. Then we have to look blah, 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 blah. But the main question here is, as Raymond pointed out a few minutes ago, is it really do you need a secondary provider? In my opinion, yes. Even if you have your own SOC team, it's always good to have a second proof, someone outside of your organization who's not charging you leg and arms to give you the services that you need. This is like, I'm an author and you hear how I speak, right? And honestly, it's not my fault. My name is Turkish, as most of you know. Raymond knows this because for the last 15 years, I speak with him worldwide in many conferences, and I keep saying the same thing. This accent is not my fault. I was born, grew up in Germany. My parents are Turkish. I lived in Australia for 14 years, then in Dubai 7 years, last 1 year in the US, and that's what's coming out. What I'm trying to say here is, I write as I speak. But even though I got PhD, this and that, I have editors, they proof check what I'm doing. Then I have people like Chaim and Raymond, both of them has contributed in my books. They review my content. So it doesn't matter how good I am. I'm not saying I'm good, by the way, just an example. How many credentials I have, how many awards I have. It's always good to have a second opinion, a second eye of what you do. And I believe, doesn't matter how good your SOC is, it's important to have a SOC provider, again, like Exidium, who doesn't charge you like an arm, but gives you exactly what you need. Extra protection will be my 2 cents.
Those are great 2 cents. I think after this call, we're going to also authenticate that you have a PhD. Just want to make sure there's documentation around that, Erdal. I do believe you, of course. Look, today was a great conversation. I always like to kind of end it with 15 minutes left and answer any sort of questions that are also on the line. So I'm just going to bring up a couple of Q&As that have come through. I think this first question might be for you, Erdal.
I guess you can ask the elections from Talat.
Would you like to speak about Turkey's election on Sunday?
Honestly, I'm flying there Sunday. I want to come back for sure. Okay, elections. Is this something new? Remember Trump and the Russian influence during the elections? Or I wrote a paper and it was published at Springer. I wrote how Trump used social media to his benefits during elections. And of course, when you look at the factors, Russia, big friend of Erdogan. Of course, I mean, based on the question, if it's true, I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to support him. I mean, I work closely with Erdal himself, and I know Kılıçdaroğlu very closely. I know both of them. At this stage, we know nation states don't care about Tim and Chaim and Raymond. They care about their existing. And how is it going to happen? They're going to work with candidates they benefit most to themselves. And when we look at this, I wouldn't be surprised if it's true. So, in my opinion, and it is not a secret, that Russia did even try to influence the election here in the United States. So I bet it's going to happen. Or when we look at Russia again, it's not a secret how they influence, before they even started the attack in Ukraine. Remember what they did? they first started cyber attack. That's normal. So is it true? In my opinion, it is. Is there any protection to do? Many. In this case, if I were Erdogan, yes, even though it looks like Russians are protecting me, I know nothing is for free. I would still be worried and take the necessary steps to secure myself and my government, my people. I know it was very political answer because, as I said, I am right in the middle as Turkish originated Australian German guy, but this is happening and I bet it's happening. Do I have evidence? No. I can swear for it, but I cannot give you the evidence, right? I swear this is true, but evidence I don't have. So,
all right. I hope we appeased that question. Thank you. That was really good. Here's another question that came in. Where's a good place to get some sort of template or assessment sheet to assess where an organization stands, whether it be like a NIST framework or something? Do you guys have any good repositories or recommendations on where they can get that?
Jens?
Well, okay. I guess there's multiple
ChatGPT.
there's multiple different
That's for sure.
Give me an assessment framework. Yeah, you just ask ChatGPT and it'll do it for you. Sorry, go ahead, Chaim.
Obviously, there are external vendors who make their entire livelihood on evaluating folks for their conformance with CSF and things like that. A self-evaluation is always a good thing to do. I would definitely recommend there's a free tooling available from the CIS, the Center for Internet Security must be, provide benchmarks, which are a good first place to start with best practices as well. And of course, all the NIST frameworks that we've just discussed are available for free. That's a service of the U.S. government that most folks, I think, in the chat right now pay taxes for. So that's what I would say. What do you think, Raymond? Let me pass the buck.
Well, yeah, there are many frameworks. I don't have a special recommendation beforehand, but yeah, I would say check with your local vendors to see who is there to help you to assess where you are and to help you to find out where you want to go.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
With your security.
Yeah, the CMMC, that cybersecurity maturity model framework, that's a great model. I know they have templates. Even NIST in general, if you look across like the detect, protect, all those different various areas, and you drill down into those individual sub areas as well, there's some great Excel spreadsheets that you can also kind of develop a heat map of where you stand. Like, where are you from a maturity perspective? Are you at a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5? And then it'll actually generate kind of like an image of, where you stand and where you need to focus on. I'd recommend kind of searching on that. I don't know where the exact link is. I could probably find that for you. A lot of times, I was a CISO in my prior role. That's what I focused on because I needed to baseline our whole environment across that entire framework. I love that framework personally because it also can map to individual controls that you need to roll out in order to kind of be compliant there as well. So I would check that. That would be my recommendation.
I'll also add that there's OWASP, Sam, on that.
Oh yeah, OWASP. Don't forget the OWASP.
And, and there's a couple of these.
I love OWASP.
I bet they have something specifically on cloud as well, if not on digital transformation.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Another question that came in too. I've been using Exidium from the pre-Iterion days. So would that be like Komodo? That's probably Komodo then, right? And Iterion blend. Now I'm a AWS partner building a security-focused operation. The question is, where can I place Exidium in the operations between SIEM and SOAR? Please offer guidance. Yeah, great question. So, Exidium offers that full stack of capabilities, including SIEM technology, XDR, extended detection response capabilities, right? We act as a SIEM that consumes all of those third-party data sources. We also sit at the endpoint. We're an endpoint protection platform, right? We offer, like traditional antivirus. We've got host intrusion prevention. We've got firewall. We've got that zero dwell containment. And then we also have endpoint detection response that's layered in there, right, for telemetry collection. So it kind of depends on, what you want as a part of your focus. I mean, we sit directly in between those two technologies, and we can automate, based on responses as well. If something happens on an endpoint, like a piece of malware executes and you need to isolate that device, right? We can execute those actions, kind of leveraging that SOAR type capability as well. So Exidium, once again, offers a wide range of capabilities that can fit directly in between those two. So if you're interested in learning more, please feel to reach directly out to myself. Okay, I don't see any more questions on the line. I do, once again, just want to thank you guys on the call for joining, for offering your incredible insight into Zero Trust and the questions that we had raised. I also want to thank all the attendees today for joining. Before I close, I do want to shamelessly plug our next webinar. I'm hosting the next webinar. It's the CISO Blend webinar series number 9. This was number 8. And ironically enough, I'm going to be talking a little bit about myself. So we got the future of MDR and managed SOC services for enterprises and MSPs. We're going to talk everything MDR related. This is like my life. I've been doing incident response and kind of managed section response for over 20 years. So the topic is going to be focused on that. Please sign up. That's going to be June 8th, 2023. So once again, thank you everyone for joining. We really appreciate your time today. And until next time. Oh, one more thing. A couple of lucky participants. Erdal, why don't you do this? This is all you, baby. Why don't you plug it?
All right. Can you open the form as well? Exidium.com CISO sign book.
Yeah.
So everybody can see it. So why give it to a couple of people? Let's give it to everybody who fills up the form. So if you want my latest book called Cybersecurity Attack and Defense Strategies, or my other book, which Raymond and Chaim has also contributed as expert, all what you have to do is go fill up the form, which I think it's exidium.com /CISO sign book, or something like that. Just Google it. Look at this. Raymond has already 2 as well. That
you guys all have books. I need to write some books. Chaim, we need to catch up to these guys. Everyone's got books.
Honestly, both of these guys has already contributed to my book, so probably my next book you're gonna be in it as well. And I want to mention also one more thing. Chaim and Raymond, they're our MVPs. They're part of our communities, which help us to be even better. So I would like to thank them one more time for being part of this community. For people that don't know what it is a community which is combined from independent experts. They tell us what we're good at, what we're bad at. We just started new, but here we go. There's the form. Fill up, and everybody who fills it up will get a physically signed copy of the book. So I'm gonna sign it under your name, and we're gonna ship it, not just order from Amazon going straight to your address. So we're gonna buy it, we're gonna sign it, and we're gonna ship it to you. And please go ahead and try our products. We hope you're gonna love it. Again, thank you, Raymond. Thank you, Chaim. Thank you, Tim, for the opportunity for being together. And thank you, everybody, for watching it. Go ahead and fill up the form. Get your free book.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you, Erdal. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Raymond. Thanks, Chaim.
Thank you for having us.